recording.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody, and thank you for participating. It's the Healthy Watersheds Consortium Grant Program webinar. Looking forward to spending the next 60 to 90 minutes with you talking about this great new program. And since we are going to be spending some time together, wanted to give you a little idea of who you'll be talking to today and meeting with. Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I will introduce myself.
Thanks, Peter. This is Jeff Lerner. I'm working as a consultant to the U.S. Endowment for this program, helping with the design and some of the management of the program. I've been active in conservation for a number of years. I've had some opportunities to work with foundations in the past as well. I'm also currently working for an organization called American Forests, and I run their conservation programs for them.
Great, thank you, Jeff. And this is Peter Stangl with the U.S. Endowment for Forest Communities. And oh man, Jeff, I'll tell you, my conscience is getting to me here. I've got to kind of fess up here and say that this is not a recent photo of me. I'm a little vain about my age. I turned 56 years ago, and I guess I'm trying to hang on to my youth. Let me see if I can find a more current picture. Yeah, there you go. There, that's a more accurate representation of how I look now. Yeah, I've been at the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities for about 5 years now. Prior to that, spent 20 years at a group many of you know called National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and just thrilled to be working on this new Healthy Watersheds Consortium grant program, and looking forward to talking with you today and hearing, telling you more about the program and getting some feedback from you all on how we can be most helpful. Let me give you a little background on how the webinar will work today. We'll kind of break it into halves. The first half of the program is primarily logistics and administrative issues. Second half of the program will be some project examples, and then the third half will be opportunity for you all to ask us some questions. So let's begin with some of the details here. We will record this webinar and we'll post it at our website, usendowment.org, Healthy Watersheds. You'll see the Healthy Watersheds banner up at the top of the web page when you go there. We look forward to answering questions. Please use the chat room function for questions. We may answer a few questions in the course of the program, but mostly we'll wait till the end and answer them there. There are a lot of people on the call. If for some reason we are not able to answer your question, please email us or give us a call. Our contact information is here. It's also at the end of the webinar. It's also on the website. And we are looking forward to talking with you. In fact, we strongly urge you to give us a call or send us an email with your project ideas so that we can talk with you and help make your project the best it can be. So in terms of a little information on the program itself, please understand this is a brand new program. We've had several requests for examples of projects that have been previously funded. There are none. It's brand new. It just started up last month. And so we're looking forward to getting started and forging some new ground here and developing some great projects. U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities is managing the program. Funding is provided by the Endowment, which is a private entity, and the EPA Office of Wetlands, Oceans, and Watersheds, which will be providing federal money. We'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but the grants could be federal, they could be private, or they could be a mix of both. And I want to pause here for a second and give our EPA colleagues a lot of credit for conceiving of this consortium. There's a terrific group of people working on healthy watersheds issues within the organization, both at the national office and in the regional offices, and we are thrilled to be working with them. Right now, this is a 6-year effort. We anticipate having funding at or about this time every year. And with any luck at all, we'll be able to renew the program and keep it going, but we do have a fairly long horizon there to work on. And as you've seen from the materials, all of which are on the website, the focus here is on watersheds in good condition. It's really a landscape protection activity. How do we protect the lands surrounding these watersheds, keep them from deteriorating so that we don't have to spend a lot of money on expensive restoration projects? And the real goal of our effort here is accelerating landscape protection for your organization or your consortium. And another key part of this program is that we want to develop a community of learning for good practices here. As you all know, there are lots of groups out there working on watershed protection, and sometimes the transfusion of ideas isn't as complete or as quick as it could be, and that's something we'd like to tackle here, and would look forward to your feedback on how best to do this. So a quick overview. Jeff, tell us a little bit more about some of the logistics of the program.
Great. Thanks, Peter. I hope those of you on the call have had an opportunity to take a look at the request for proposals. We encourage you to read it carefully. As Peter said, we're definitely willing to answer whatever questions we can. I wanted to just go through for the next few slides and talk about some of the nuts and bolts and mechanics of what we're asking for in the RFP. And we'll start with and all of this is actually in the document itself. So in terms of the eligibility for this program, we really wanted to try to keep it fairly wide open to a variety of different types of applicants. So I think what you can see here is that we're open to proposals coming from not only nonprofit organizations, but also from tribes, from state agencies, from local government agencies, academic institutions, even for-profit companies. And another important point here is that we recognize that watershed protection requires a lot of cooperation. And so we are really encouraging partnerships and the leveraging of resources through this program. And so we think that it's probably important that federal agencies can and ultimately should be a part of landscape scale watershed collaborations. But we cannot fund federal agencies directly as recipients of these grants through this program. And nor can we fund individuals that are operating on their own. So just to make that clear in terms of who can apply and who cannot. The next slide talks about funding restrictions. So even though we recognize also that some form of advocacy may be a piece of successful watershed protection activities, we need to make it clear that we cannot fund that activity through this particular program. We are encouraging the acceleration of land protection activities, but because of the limitations on the amount of funding that we have available for this program, we're not able to actually put dollars directly into land acquisition, conservation easement activities. If we were to take the $1 million that we have or so this year and try to buy land with it, we could maybe conserve 300 to 400 acres or so, but we feel as though we can get greater impact if we allow the dollars to be used in ways that can help increase funding for land protection or other activities that support watershed protection. I also want to emphasize that the focus of the program is really not on restoration of degraded watersheds, but on trying to protect those areas before they become degraded. That said, we do recognize that there are often areas that are in relatively good shape, but that may also need some restoration activities. And so we're willing to consider certain restoration activities, but they need to be part of a larger watershed protection activity. So we'll be asking questions about how those restoration activities that you might be proposing can be scaled and how they can connect more specifically to advancing the protection of more watershed lands. And one of the things we'll try to do later on in the program is actually give you an example of what we're talking about later on. On the funding side, we have about 1.5 million or so available this year and for the next several years. We expect that there will be a request for proposals available for the next 5 years. Projects funded through this cycle must conclude by the end of year 2020. We are also requiring a 25% minimum match requirement, and we will also look favorably on more match that can be brought to proposals. This is just to let you know that the grant categories that we'll be talking about as we go through the program here may change from year to year. So again, this is consistent with the concept of this being a community of learning. As we learn more about what types of proposals we receive and what the needs are out there, we may change and alter the RFP from year to year as we go. So So the bottom line being here that we recognize that right now we have limited funds to try to accomplish a very large job. And I guess one way that you could think about our dollars through this program is that we're trying to help boost performance in terms of watershed protection activities. So you can think about these dollars as almost like a fuel additive, if you will, to help accelerate the pace of what we're doing out there on the landscape. And we'll come back to that concept a little bit later. The next slide talks about the process schedule that we've outlined. This is again in the RFP. We launched the request for proposals in December. Proposal deadline is in mid-March, so you still have a little bit of time to be able to put together proposals, ask us questions, and we hope that this information will be useful to you as you're sort of in the mid-process here of putting together your proposals. We do expect to try to have decisions by the end of, essentially by the end of April. An important point here is, and again this is related to the idea of the community of learning, we're interested in figuring out how we can best share what it is that we are learning with others around the country. We've thought about convening a group of the grantees to develop such a community of learning. When that would happen really depends on the composition of the proposals that we receive. We were thinking about having an annual meeting, and the timing would be such that we could inform the creation of the RFP for the next year. So, but we're also open to ideas about how best to do this. So if you have other ideas about how best we could create this community of learning, we'd like to hear them. And so I guess an important point here is that this is not just a program about the funding, it's also about how we can be sharing this information. So in terms of what we're looking for with this program, if you think of our program and our funding as a fuel additive, if you will, to boost performance, what might that boost really look like? Maybe it's helping to tap into other sources of land protection capital, or maybe it's developing some sort of an analysis that would help us to determine what long-term funding needs are and what some different funding options may be. Maybe it actually may have to do with recognizing that land use policy decisions that are happening on the ground influence the degree to which watershed lands can be protected. So maybe there's a need to look into that particular aspect. Or maybe one of the highest and best uses of these dollars might be to actually have a person who can be employed to actually look into some particular aspect of this watershed protection work and help move from fairly limited resources in terms of watershed protection to creating more dollars and getting more conservation done on the landscape. So again, it is a big job, and we're looking for large leverage associated with this program. What we want, part two, this slide illustrates that the boost you may need for your work may actually be very specific to your watershed. And so we're encouraging locally developed solutions. We do have a category which we'll talk about in terms of the grants associated with innovation. Innovation is nice, but it may not be necessary. If you've got a good idea, we have a category that you may be able to apply to come up with how to flesh that out. But if you're also proposing to do something which has been done many times before and proven to be successful, that may be perfectly acceptable as well. We are trying to get folks to think at larger scales in terms of the watershed planning work that they do, and we're looking for solutions that are scalable. We're also looking to have you help us to develop measurable ways to measure watershed protection. And part of this has to do with us needing to demonstrate the short-term and the long-term benefits of watershed protection. And this is where we could use your help. We'd like to build this program over time, and so what we will need to do is we will need in the short term to be able to demonstrate fairly quick success associated with the program. So we're looking for some great ideas, and we're looking for some ideas that we can support and show good results in a relatively short time frame, but also have long-term benefits for communities. Oops. Thanks to research that's been conducted by the World Resources Institute, we are starting to zero in on a series of success factors, which we believe, taken together, will lead to accelerated watershed protection. We're going to ask you to tell us about these particular factors or ingredients for success in your application. We also think that this can be an important diagnostic tool that can help us understand more about what's happening within your watershed area, but may also be helpful to you as an exercise to figure out what's working and maybe what's not working in your watershed, and why the pace of watershed protection in your area may not be going as quick as it can. And this will help us, we think, understand what the needs are and where a particular project could emerge that would help advance watershed protection in your area. Some of the work that the World Resources Institute is doing is in the process of being finalized and will be published shortly. We'd be happy to share that with you when it becomes available. In the meantime, we also wanted to point out this other resource for you having to do with some of the work that the Bonneville Environmental Foundation has done in parts of the Pacific Northwest. Both the WRI research and some of the work that Bonneville Environmental Foundation has supported over the years have been very helpful in informing the creation of this program. And so we'd encourage you to take a look at this resource available as well. And Peter's going to talk a little bit more in detail about what these success factors are to give you a better taste of what it is that we're looking for.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Yeah, as Jeff mentioned, these success factors appear in the application. So if you hadn't had a chance to look at that, please do take a look. And we ask you to give a very concise sort of status report for each of these in the application itself. And please understand there's not really any right or wrong answer here. What we're looking for is just a very honest assessment of where you are. We think that this research is important and will help us identify ways to really ramp up your programs. So let me just skim through these very quickly. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. And I think a lot of these will be very self-evident to you if you've been working on watershed projects or any other projects for that matter. But obviously a threat to the landscape, development or fire or something like that creates a great opportunity to undertake protection, as do opportunities. You know, if you happen to have a funding source that appears that paves the way for landscape level protection, that can be very important for getting a program going. You all know that partnerships are critical, and we're looking for broad, meaningful partnerships that include both the public and private sector, and where all the participants have a shared vision of success so that you're all pulling in the same direction. I think one of the key take-home lessons for me in that paper published by the Bonneville Environmental Foundation is that successful watershed protection is a long-term endeavor. We're talking decades. And you've got to have strong partnerships and a shared vision of success if you're going to be able to last that long and see significant improvements. A business case for investment can be a real plus. If, for example, you were able to demonstrate that protecting your watershed improved water quality and therefore reduced water treatment or storage or transportation costs, that might be a real incentive for a local community or a water utility to get involved in watershed protection. Number 5, champions and advocates, is one that really jumps out, and that is if you have a very effective advocate in a position to make things happen, that can make a big difference. For example, Raleigh, North Carolina, created a terrific watershed protection program a few years ago, and it was really spearheaded by the then mayor, Charles Meeker, who spoke out and was able to get city council and other partners involved. So watch out for these champions and cultivate them. Outreach and education to targeted audiences can be critical. Oftentimes this might be the water utility or landowners, whoever it is in your particular watershed, where it's important for you to get a message out for them to help them understand the importance of watershed protection. Of course, having a good science-based plan is critically important, a plan that might help you identify the most important areas to protect, something that helps you narrow down your focus a little bit and gives you good scientific justification for doing what you want to do. And of course, if you've got a big ambitious program, you're going to need financing at scale. If your goal is to protect 100,000 acres and you're not able to come up with more than $50,000 a year, well, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. So are you capable of developing or identifying financing mechanisms at a scale necessary for you to implement your vision? And then finally, capacity and social infrastructure. One of the most important things that the authors of that Bonneville Environmental Foundation report found was that the capacity of local groups to continue to grow and adapt and to maintain their personnel over the long term was a critical factor for success. And so that's why we've devoted some energy in this program to helping support infrastructure needs. And again, as Jeff mentioned, as soon as the World Resources Institute paper is published, we'll make it available on our website so that you can read more about these things and learn how they might impact and improve your ability to be successful protecting your watershed. All right. Cameron, could you advance me? There we go. One other thing that may be a little bit different about this program relative to some of the other programs you've participated in the past is that we are absolutely committed to your success. I mean, the bottom line is we can't be successful without you being successful. And so we want to be there to help you and respond to any needs or challenges that you might have. I don't know if you ever watched the program Shark Tank, but when these investors make an investment in a new company, they don't just send a check and then wait to see what happens. They send a check and then they help that company with resources that they need to be successful. And that's what we want to do. We're not going to be in your face and get in your business, but we want to work with you to make sure that whatever needs you have are being addressed so that you can be more successful. And that might be communication, it might be facilitation, whatever it might be, we're committed to either helping ourselves or identifying consultants that can come in and help you get the job done. So please keep in mind that that'll be an important part of the program as we go forward. Oops. There we go. A little bit about the grant categories. One thing we tried to do as we prepared this RFP was not to be too prescriptive in exactly what we were looking for. What we tried to do was identify a vision, more or less, for what we wanted, and that is an accelerated pace of watershed protection. And then we're really looking to all of you who are out in the field doing great stuff to help us identify how that's going to take place. So as Jeff mentioned, we want to be that fuel additive that allows you to go to the next level. And so these three categories were created really to help you better understand the kinds of things that we're interested in funding. These are not rigid categories. Don't worry too much about which one you apply to. If you apply to one and we think you're better suited for another, we'll move you there. This is really just to kind of give you an idea of the broad groups of categories of projects that we think are appropriate for this program to support. So for example, watershed action projects, this is typically for an organization or a collaboration that's been on the ground for a while. They've got a good plan, they know what they need to do, and they need some additional funding or staffing or something else to get it done. So kind of plug and play for us. This is where we see some of the short-term results coming. The middle category is more on capacity. You may have been up and running for a while and struggling to see the kind of results that you need to see. You're wondering how you're going to be able to build programs to be there for the long haul, decades perhaps, to get the work done. And this is where some multi-year support might come in handy for you. You might need to create some planning or do some relationship building to get you where you want to go. And then finally, the third category, which is advancing the state of practice. what we're looking for here are some really creative, innovative ideas that might change how watershed protection is done at a regional level, or perhaps even at a national level. What are some really catalytic ideas that can then be scaled up? And it's going to be really critical here, if you apply to this category, that you help us understand the scalability of your project and how you will help that scalability take place. So you've got to help demonstrate to us how you'll take your great idea and get it out there to the world and make good things happen. I thought it might be helpful to perhaps talk about some projects that might not be a good fit. We've had the pleasure of talking with a lot of folks over the past couple weeks and had some really great ideas come through. So let's spend a little time on this. And I think for me, the really important thing to think about is that sentence in the middle of the page there, and that is, can you connect your project to measurable watershed protection? It's really difficult for us to say whether or not a project idea is going to be a good one or not, but if you can demonstrate how your idea will lead to large-scale, measurable watershed protection, then this is probably the grant program for you. So let's go through some of these photos a little bit, and these are examples that have come in over the past couple weeks. In the upper left there, you see a culvert that's in desperate need of repair. And we know that culverts create a lot of problems for migratory fish and flooding and other things, and repairing culverts is a big need. But repairing culverts per se is probably not a good fit for this grant program unless you can demonstrate a way that fixing or replacing or repairing those culverts will lead to broader landscape level protection. And even then, we'd want the proposal to us to be something that would perhaps open up additional funding that could accomplish culvert protection on a larger scale. So a $25,000 grant to replace a culvert in one drainage is probably not going to be competitive, but if you can think of a way that changing out culverts or repairing them will improve or accelerate landscape protection, we'd like to talk with you. Go down to the goat photo there, the sheep. We know that leakage of manure into water systems creates a real problem, and that there are a lot of great programs out there for farmers to help them fix this issue. Probably not a good fit for this program unless you can demonstrate that helping farmers control manure leaking into waterways is going to lead to landscape level protection. Go to the upper right there. Riparian restoration is critical for wildlife, erosion control, helping with flooding. It's a great idea, but I'm not sure it's the best fit for this program unless it's a component of a much larger effort. Again, you'd have to connect it to landscape level water protection. Down the slide to the point sources of pollution there. We know that's important. Again, think about how working on point source pollution can affect landscape level watershed protection. And then finally on the right, education. Obviously education is critically important, training programs, things like that, but how will it lead to accelerated watershed protection? That's the important issue for us. A little bit about how we will evaluate your individual application. This material is also in the request for proposals. The first thing we're looking at in the column on the left there is obviously we want it to be a healthy watershed. That's kind of an in or out kind of question. It's up to you to demonstrate to us that your watershed is healthy. We have no specific criteria there. We had a great question this past week. If your watershed is 303D listed, does that eliminate you from contention? And the answer is no. We're much more interested in the quality of your projects than the specific definition of your watershed. But again, the purpose of the program is to protect healthy watersheds. If you've got healthy portions of the watershed out there and they're valuable to save, then I think you'd qualify for the program. We're going to look at your answers to the success factors. And remember, there's not necessarily a right or a wrong here. What we're looking for are good, honest answers so that we can get some context for your program. Where do you stand? Where are the opportunities to help you, and how can we be helpful? The real core of the application are the goals, hurdles, and outcomes. You have the opportunity to identify 3 specific goals. Please invest a lot of time thinking about these. The space provided to answer this information is short, so we're looking for concise, very thoughtful answers, but that's the real core of your proposal. Obviously, budget and leverage are important. We want to make sure that you have a thoughtful budget, one that allows you to accomplish the work you're proposing to do, and also your ability to leverage funds, and perhaps leverage funds through the proposal is going to be important. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at the organization or the consortium or collaboration that's coming together here. Do you have experience in the area? What are your past successes? What's your potential for future growth? Obviously, sending in some dark chocolate with the application is always a big plus. And then the last 3 categories there on the left are some big point opportunities for each of the different categories of grant programs. So for example, if you're proposing an implementation project, we're going to want to see how the impact is. Is this a landscape level impact, or is it a very small impact? And obviously you'll get more points for the larger the impact you have. If it's a building watershed protection capacity program, we're going to want to have some feel for how ready are you to actually see results being accomplished. If you're bringing together a group for the very first time, meeting for their initial meeting to try and build a long-term program, you might not be as competitive as a group that's 3/4 of the way there and needs a little bit of a boost. So we'll measure out some points there depending on where you are. And then advancing the state of practice, we're going to want to see whether or not the idea you propose is really going to have a big impact. If you're proposing some sort of new watershed financing mechanism that could result in millions or tens of millions of dollars being available for watershed protection, well, that's going to be very appealing. So this just gives you some idea of how we'll be rating the proposals. And of course, we're just kidding about the dark chocolate. Please don't send us any chocolate. So that was proposal evaluation. Now let's talk a little bit about project evaluation. So when you get out there and you start doing your project, how are we going to tell if you're being successful? So when you're swinging that hammer and trying to make the bell ring, how are you going to do it? And what we basically said in the RFP and the application is we're looking for you to propose metrics and ways to evaluate your project. We do not have a preconceived notion of how best to do this. You're the experts at the local level, and we want to hear from you how you're going to measure progress and how you'll move the needle. So for example, if you have a watershed plan in place, how will the proposal you're sending us help you implement that plan, and how will you measure your success? Maybe it's in terms of acres protected. That's an obvious, easy one. Maybe it's some way to measure watershed function protected or threats averted. It could be any number of different things. So we're asking you to be thoughtful and creative about this and help us understand how you want to measure progress. And then what we'll be able to do, hopefully, is take the different proposals from each of the different applicants and roll those up and help demonstrate to EPA that we're making progress at a landscape level. All right, so we're going to move on to the second half of the show here, and Jeff is going to talk a little bit about some project examples.
Thanks, Peter. The first thing to emphasize about these examples that we're going to go through is that these were not funded. This program that we're talking about here is a brand new program, so we've never funded anything under this program yet. So the examples we're going to take you through are, I think they're all good project examples that illustrate watershed protection. We're not necessarily endorsing the groups, organizations, et cetera, associated with these projects, but we do think that these are good ideas. And what we try to do in going through these is try to illustrate for you what's going on in the watershed and what was the action and how it might connect and fit with some of the grant categories that we've outlined for this particular RFP. And they may not always be perfect matches, but at least it should give you some insight into some of the thinking that we're doing here. So let's get started with a project in Oregon. This is in the upper Deschutes watershed. If I can just advance.
Cameron, yeah, you might have to. There we go. Thank you.
There we go. Great. Thanks. So the story here is that this particular watershed protection effort does illustrate the need for building long-term capacity for watershed protection. This is a watershed area that's considered one of the Bonneville Environmental Foundation's model watershed programs, and with that comes essentially 10 years of support from the Environmental Foundation, and they provide a lot of technical support. They provide advice. They try to get to know these watersheds and the groups associated with them in more detail. So in terms of what happened here, after working together with the groups in the watershed, we have Watershed Council, land trusts, and a river conservancy that are all now working together in a much more coordinated fashion to protect and restore habitat and also monitor progress in the watershed. They've identified, and there's a focus on priority stream reaches within the watershed. They've been able to accomplish land protection. They've removed fish barriers. They've improved habitat and restoring stream flow. And so all of those are great things that are happening. But the key here is that the relatively small amount of funding that the Environmental Foundation provided to them really went into the coordination and support for developing this shared set of strategies that these groups can work on together. And so for us, this would be, I think, best aligned with what we're thinking about with the idea of this building capacity for watershed protection category that we've created. And so if you're thinking about what's going on in your watershed, you might think about what are all the different, what are the particular capacity needs that you have, and whether or not you're ready for the development of some sort of a collaborative effort like this, and that could be what you would propose to us for funding.
Excellent. Let's switch coasts here for a second. And again, remember, as Jeff pointed out, these are just examples of great projects that we think would be appropriate for the program. So just keep that in mind. But this is a project that involves the Sebago Lake watershed and the Portland Water District. And this is some terrific work that the World Resources Institute did for the partners up there. And basically, Portland Water has a filtration avoidance waiver. The quality of the water coming into their treatment facility is so high that they basically have to do minimal filtration. But of course their watershed is changing. It's largely forested, it's being developed, other activities are taking place that could potentially impact water quality and result in Portland Water having to build a very expensive filtration plant, which is not something they want to do. So World Resources Institute came in and did what they call a gray-green financial analysis to help Portland Water and the other partners understand the economic benefits of natural infrastructure versus man-made infrastructure. So that analysis is what Jeff and I would consider to be an advancing the state of practice project. It's a relatively modest program that provides some clear financial guidance to the community up there. And one of the big results has been that Portland Water is now providing modest funding to local land trusts to help them go out and finance watershed protection. They're putting conservation easements on critical parts of the landscape to help protect them from degradation that would affect water quality. So a really neat example of an advancing the state of practice project that results in substantial, hopefully sustainable funding for watershed protection.
So let's shift gears back and go out west again. The next couple of examples illustrate the use of different finance mechanisms to achieve watershed protection. The first one comes from California. The Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund is a source of funding that can be used. It's primarily used for infrastructure projects associated with supporting clean water goals, but it can be used for green infrastructure projects associated with non-point source pollution, and that could be in the realm of land protection. So this is an example of, and California's done this a few times, and there are other examples in other states around the country as well. In this particular case, there was a property several years ago, Howard Ranch, that was a 12,000-acre property, a very important area for watershed protection, important habitats associated with the Cosumnes River. The Nature Conservancy was able to secure an $8 million loan through the SRF, and also identify and secure other funding sources to get ultimately to a $13.6 million price tag for the land. They were able to resell a portion of the property for livestock use, but with an agricultural easement associated with it, so they're able to recapture some dollars and be able to pay back the parts of the loan. And so what this illustrates, tapping into an existing source of funding, but using it in a slightly different way. They were also able to repay the loan, and the outcome being that more land was conserved associated with watershed protection. They were able to also, in the process, take some of the land and create more accessible open space that's available for recreational access. And like I said, they were able to pay back the loan here. So this is this could be an example of, they know the system very well, the habitats, the areas have been identified that were important, and what was necessary was finding the opportunity and then the funding to be able to actually implement part of their strategy for protecting the watershed. And so we would consider this, Peter and I would consider this to be an example of a watershed action project, that first category, that first grant category. And the next example, also from the western U.S., but a little more interior west, comes from the Whitefish, Montana area. The story here is that there was a portion of the watershed that became available for protection or development, about a 3,000-acre area, the Haskell Basin. And what was done here was the Trust for Public Land actually conducted a feasibility study looking at different funding options to determine how best to secure the funding, to protect the lands. Based upon that feasibility study, what then happened was they chose, members of the community chose that the best course of action may be to actually go ahead and tack on a little bit of extra onto their existing resort tax for the area, and that could be used to spread the burden, if you will, out for protecting the watershed beyond just the residents of the area, but also people that come and visit, use the area, and love it. And so this allowed them to be able to actually fund $8 million of ultimately a $17 million need, so that the 3,000 acres here could be conserved. So there's a couple different pieces here that might connect with our different grant categories. One might be the feasibility study associated with identifying the different funding options. This might be in our advancing the state of practice category. And then the other category was that the actual land itself was conserved and is consistent with identifying and protecting priority areas of the watershed. And so that would be an example of a watershed action project.
Excellent. This is Peter again. Just a reminder that if you've got questions or comments, go ahead and use the chat room to submit those to us. Oh, hey, it looks like our first one is coming in. It's from Mr. G. Clooney, and his question is, where can my attorney be in touch regarding unauthorized use of my image? Jeff?
I don't know. I think we'd have to refer that to...
Yeah, fortunately, Cameron, who is our technological expert on this program, is also a lawyer. So, Cameron, we're going to leave that one to you. Anyway, go ahead and submit us your questions when you get them. All right, down to Raleigh-Durham. A really terrific project here. Raleigh is a fast-growing area, attracting a lot of well-educated, affluent people. The place is growing quickly. And they had a little shot across their bow a few years ago when their reservoir was added to the 303D list. for increased sedimentation, pollutants, things like that. They had a drought, they had some floods, a lot of population growth, and they realized that a sustainable source of clean, affordable water was critical for their continued growth. They brought together a lot of groups to talk about the issue, and they realized that one of the challenges was that a lot of the population growth was taking place right in their watershed. And so they came together, and a couple project ideas, if we had been able to be part of this, one of the key things they did was they went out and they identified critical parts of the watershed that were important for water quality purposes. So they have a map, they know what the highest priority parcels are, and the local land trust could then say, hey, we need funding not just in general, but to protect these specific areas which are likely to have the biggest impact on water quality. So I think that would have been a good example of a watershed action project. But then once they had these lands identified, they also needed to bring together the land trusts and have someone work with the city officials and the water utilities to talk about funding schemes, where they'd get the money to do this. And so I think that they could have qualified for a Building Watershed Protection Capacity Grant to do that. And the outcome here is really outstanding. Originally, they were funding watershed protection with annual appropriations. They realized that wasn't sustainable. They created a watershed protection fee, originally 1 penny per 100 gallons. It's just been increased to 1.5 cents per 100 gallons, generating about $2 million a year straight for watershed protection done by these local land trusts. Jeff?
Okay, so the next slide is we're going to use this to illustrate that there's an awful lot of plans that have been created out there for conservation purposes, and the point here, I think, is that some of these different planning efforts, while the objective may not have been specifically watershed health, many of them can actually be used and they can be great resources for guiding watershed protection. So here's just one example of what that might look like. The brook trout joint venture is a collaboration among a number of different partners working throughout the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. They have a plan. They have done a wide variety of restoration projects. They're one of 18 national fish habitat partnerships, so there's plans like this that have been created in a number of other locations around the country. So they're definitely engaged in the restoration of watershed areas associated with recovery of brook trout in the east. But what attracted me also about this effort was that, and for the purposes of this program, was that they've identified priority sub-watersheds that are relatively intact and require protection. And that's what this map on the right is trying to illustrate. And so if this information were taken and used to guide watershed protection and activities were happening within these different sub-watersheds, I think that would be an example of a watershed action project where you've taken an existing plan and you've utilized it to be able to guide watershed protection in your area. And I should just also say that there are many, many other examples of plans that you could be looking at, and they include source water protection plans, which have been developed in a number of places around the U.S. There are now state wildlife action plans in every state. There are state forest action plans now in every state. There are even comprehensive outdoor recreation plans that have been created in every state as well. Some of those are spatial and some of them are not. But the point is that there's a variety of different plans, and if you can align watershed protection goals with what's happening within what's required or suggested within some of these different plans, you might be able to find a way to give some additional direction for watershed protection. And again, the question is really, do these plans help to provide direction on where to focus protection? How can our grant program actually help with the implementation of that strategic protection, which has been defined through some of these other plans?
So North American Waterfowl Management Plan?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, be out there looking for who's got a good plan, who's been effective with these sorts of things in the past, and how can we be the additive to their fuel supply to ramp things up a little bit. Cameron, if you'll advance us to the last one. So one more example here, a great project taking place down in the Lower Miss, being led by the Mississippi River Trust. They're working on frequently flooded farmlands. These were lands that were originally bottomland hardwood forests that were cut and were being planted for row crops when commodity prices were high. They are subject to floods, create a lot of erosion problems. And the Mississippi River Trust has developed a great program to go out and provide some financial incentives to these landowners to protect and restore these lands. And basically, the project idea, I think, for us here would be that Mississippi River Trust identified federal funding available from the Natural Resources Conservation Service that would fund protection of these lands through easements and then restoration. But to access that federal funding, they needed a 5% non-federal match. They might have come to us and said, hey, help us achieve this 5% non-federal match. That will in turn trigger 20 times as much federal funding for the actual on-the-ground work. And indeed, they've been able to produce some terrific results, more than $12 million in federal funds and 15,000 acres protected. So again, these project examples are just things that we've seen that we think make a lot of sense and represent the kinds of activities that we'd like to accomplish through the Healthy Watersheds Consortium program. So that's the end of our prepared presentation. Again, we strongly encourage you to contact us with your project ideas. You can email, you can call us by phone, either one of us, and we will do our best to provide you some guidance or refer you to one of our project team pictured there at the bottom. I want to give a special thanks to Cameron Tommy for helping us through the logistics of the presentation today, and happy to answer any questions that might come through. Someone type something in the chat room just so that we'll know it's working. So we haven't had any questions come through that I can see yet.
Hey, Peter, we do have a few questions, and if you look over on the panel on the right, there's a questions tab. See that?
No, we're seeing the questions that you guys sent, that you and Flo sent to us, but we're not seeing ones from other folks.
If you look up a couple tabs from chat, there's a tab labeled questions.
Look up from chat. Yeah, we're
not seeing it, Cameron. Why don't you want to read the question to us?
Sure, I can do that. I've got a few here.
Okay.
Is match limited to cash, or can in-kind be used?
Yeah, in-kind is acceptable as well.
Okay. There's a 5-year window for the program. Should proposals for a multi-year or 1 year include an indication of what would be asked for in the following years?
Yeah, this is Peter. I think that's really helpful for us to understand where you're going. One of the things you're going to see in the application is we give you some space there to talk about where you see your program in the long run, 30 years from now. So we recognize that we don't right now have the capacity to talk about 30-year grant programs, but I think the more you can do to help us understand how the particular piece you're asking for now will move you down the road and what your long-term vision is, that's really important. So yes, please do that.
Okay. Next question, do corporations need to be registered with SAM?
Tell me what SAM is.
I think it's the federal database for federal grants.
That I'm not sure. We'll have to check and get back to you on that one. One of the things we'll do is we'll take the questions that are posed today and write them up and include them in a frequently asked questions section of the homepage. So we'll check on that and get back to you.
Okay. Next question. Does a 303D listing make a program disqualified for grants?
Yeah, we had this question before, and the answer is no, it does not. You can be on a 303D list and still propose watershed protection activities within your watershed.
Okay. Next question. Can you define landscape scale in terms of acreage or watershed HUC size?
So when we asked for context and for planning activities, we tried to choose a HUC 8 scale. So we're asking folks to plan at that larger HUC size, but it really kind of depends on the situation. We actually ended up with a couple questions coming from some coastal watershed communities that have very small watershed areas associated with their areas, and so we need to understand the context of what you're planning at, but we are looking for those larger scale planning exercises associated with more of a HUC 8 so that we can get the context. That said, what you're actually proposing to do may be specifically focused within a sub-watershed, even a HUC 12 within your watershed. But again, we just want to understand the larger context of your watershed protection efforts and how it's going to make a contribution to overall watershed health.
So this is Peter. So Jeff, if they had a project that they were proposing for a smaller geographic area, they would probably need to come back and demonstrate to us how that could be scaled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So in other words, if you had a project that might be implemented at a smaller scale, we would need to see how that could then be translated into a larger scale activity.
Other questions, Cameron?
Sure. Regarding the 25% match, can the match be federal dollars?
This is Peter. That's a good question. So recall that right now this program is funded both by the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, which is a private entity, and we're putting private funding into the program, and it's being funded by EPA, which is a federal program. So right now the grant pool is both federal and non-federal funds. And what we're hoping to do is work with applicants to take advantage of whatever potential match they might have by determining whether or not it's best for us to put private funds into your project, federal funds, or some combination of both. So the answer to your question is yes, federal funds are potentially a match. We just have to kind of see what proposals come in and what sort of match is being proposed. So just be very clear with us about the source of your funding, and that'll help us determine how best to shape an award if that's the direction we go.
Okay. Next question. Can an organization submit multiple proposals in different categories?
Sure. Again, we urge you to contact us first so that we can talk with you about the project and help you understand where we're headed, but no reason you can't submit more than one.
All right, I'm looking through. Okay, is funding limited in any way by geography?
No, not for this this first round. Maybe that'll change in the future, but for now, this is a national program. It's available for projects all over the U.S.
Yeah. So the only limit is it has to be within the U.S. Yeah.
Okay. Can program funds be used for monitoring the effectiveness of a protection plan? If so, how much of a role should monitoring figure into the proposed project?
Well, that's a good question. I'll start, and Jeff, you chime in. Obviously, monitoring to determine the effectiveness of what you're doing is critically important. We also understand that can become very expensive. So I think that if you're able to propose a very practical and cost-effective way to do that, we would encourage you to do so. I'm not sure if the gist of your question is whether or not a project that's focused on monitoring would be appropriate. If that's the gist of the question, I think you'd have to demonstrate to us why monitoring would accelerate landscape level protection efforts.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so if it is a proposal based on, it's really focused on monitoring, we'd have to, again, going back to those success factors, we'd want to learn a little bit more about where you're at with those as well. And if maybe monitoring is the most appropriate thing that you really need help with, and the other success factors are in good shape. But we really need to understand that through the application to determine that a project focused exclusively on monitoring would be a strong candidate.
Good question.
Okay, next question. With regards to multi-year projects, do these projects have to reapply annually?
So again, this is the first year of funding, and as we're learning about this, we may be willing in this first round to make a long multi-year commitment to certain projects for that building watershed capacity category in the middle. But what we may do is want to make a commitment that's just for a few years and see how it goes. I mean, either way, if we get involved in any of these long-term watershed collaboratives, the project team here would want to be engaged throughout. So, so it sounds a little bit like a squishy answer. So the answer may be yes, we might fund 5 full years, but depending upon the application and what's being proposed, we might decide to break it up and propose that instead we start with a 1 or 2 year grant and then see how it goes.
Yeah, but another way to look at it though is if you're proposing a multi-year commitment and we agree to fund that, we would make a commitment to you for the multi-year period, but annual funding would be contingent upon performance.
Right.
So if you're requesting 4 years of funding and we approve that project, we'll go through the first year. You would not have to reapply, but we would do an annual assessment with you to make sure that your progress was sufficient, and then the second year's funding would be released or however it was set up. So you can apply for multi-year funding. If it's approved, you don't have to reapply each year. We would just go through an annual evaluation with you to make sure that you're making good progress. So the idea there is to give you a little bit of long-term security, because we know it's important and will accelerate your results if you can count on funding over a multi-year period. By the same token, we just need to make sure that you're making good progress. So.
Okay. Can you clarify the distinction between lobbying, which we associate with advocating for specific legislation, versus the type of ongoing communication with public officials to better learn about their perspective and share our concepts?
What we'll do is, I think there's some pretty clear legal guidance on the difference between the two, and I'm not prepared to recite that for you. So what we'll do is we will get the legal definition of the two and put it up on the frequently asked questions. We certainly understand that educating folks about the benefits of watershed protection is important.
One way to maybe illustrate that would be, let's see if I can do this right. So if we funded or supported one of those feasibility studies that we talked about in the past, examples for looking at different funding options, some of the outreach and education associated with that to make people aware of what the results were and what some of the funding options are available, I think that would all be considered sort of fair game under our program. But if it came to then trying to actually take one of those funding options and put it on a ballot and get people to vote one way or the other for it, that type of activity would not qualify. But like Peter said, we will actually put the language out there so that it'll be a little more clear.
Okay, next question. Can this funding apply to inland lakes? And if so, how does one deal with the HUC code?
Not exactly sure what you mean there. I mean, can it apply to inland lakes? I mean, inland lakes are part of a watershed, so if you're looking at protecting the landscape around an inland lake, that's certainly appropriate. And again, the HUC code guidance is basically just to help you understand that we're looking for landscape level activities. We're not looking for very small site-specific projects. So I'm sorry, I don't fully understand the question. If you want to send us an email with a little more elaboration, that'd be terrific, and we'll try and do a better job to answer it.
Okay. Would developing water quality standards be an acceptable watershed protection capacity building project?
I think the key there is whether or not you could link developing water quality standards with landscape level protection. So would creating those standards accelerate protection of the watershed? Is that fair, Jeff?
Right.
Yep. Go back to that slide we showed of the different photos, and the key sentence in the middle there was, can your project lead to landscape level protection? And if you can convince us of that, then I think you'd be eligible to submit an application.
Okay. Next question. When a watershed is proposing funding for pre-planning to bring stakeholders to the table to develop common goals for a watershed, what type of organization should submit the proposal? An NGO? A government entity?
Well, I think whoever is most qualified, recognizing that the two ineligible groups are individuals and federal agencies. So that's up to you guys. Whoever is best suited to carry out the project and to do the work that's proposed. We have no preference.
Okay, Peter. As of now, that's all the questions we've got that aren't repeats of earlier questions and other pieces that we can pick up in an FAQ. We've gotten a number of questions about whether or not this presentation will be available, and it will. A recorded version of the webinar will be posted on the webpage as soon as we get wrapped up here. And that's where the RFP and other advisory materials are also located.
Yep. Excellent. Well, thanks everybody. We apologize for the capacity issue. We were supposed to have up to, or we could have up to 1,000 callers. For some reason, we got cut off at 100. We'll go ahead and probably, propose another webinar and give everybody another chance. Special thanks to you, Cameron, for helping us with the logistics and guiding us through this. Appreciate that very much. We will have this posted shortly. And again, please don't hesitate to give us a call or send us an email, and we're happy to help any way that we can. I'm really looking forward to working with you. We're very excited about this and very pleased by the response we're getting and anxious to see what great ideas you all have. So thank you very much and look forward to working with you. Thank you, Cameron.